Hi everyone, in this video we'll be going through alignment cues for a few common seated postures. We'll actually start by squatting. So coming into a squat, malasana, just want to make sure when your students come into this, sometimes an easy way for them to get into this might have been from standing, bringing their hands down and pressing the hips back, hands to the ground, and then begin to sink their hips down coming into the squat. So they may need a block to support under their hips. If you find that their heels are up, they may want to place a blanket under their heels to support their ankles. As far as alignment, you want to make sure that the knees are tracking over the ankles, over the feet. So if you notice that your students' knees are dropping in, have them use their elbows to press their knees out, and then allowing their head to rest on their thumbs or just keeping their head in a neutral position, but just checking that the knees are staying in line with the rest of the ankle and the foot so that there's not too much pressure on the knee or the ankle. All right, our next one is Cow's Pose, Gomukhasana. So in Cow's Pose, you start by sitting back on your heels. And one thing you might notice when you or your students sit back on your heels, there's a tendency for the low back to start to arch. Check that the toes, the big toes are together, heels are apart. So there's a little spot for yourself or your students to sit between your heels, and then tucking the tailbone under, creating a more neutral spine here, lifting up to the crown of the head, ears back in line with the shoulders. Then from here to come into that cow's face, reaching one hand up and dropping the hand back so that your elbows pointing up towards the sky, and reaching your other hand back and up with that palm facing out, clasping your hands together. What you'll notice here at this point, many times all of us or our students start to arch quite a bit to bring the hands, to give a little less distance between the hands and bring those hands closer together. Again, have your students tuck the tailbone under, lean back into that upper arm, open through the chest. So notice if they're starting to round down, encourage them to keep the chin lifted and leaning back into that top arm. Then from here, they might stay here or begin to fold forward, bringing the forehead towards the ground, keeping the hands together. So many of us and many of our students can't quite reach their hands together. Give them a towel or a yoga strap or a yoga belt to bridge that space between their hands so they can maintain a good posture, good alignment without having to bring their hands all the way together. All right, our next one is pigeon. So for pigeon, we can either get into this from downward facing dog, just bringing one knee in and beginning to place it down in that pigeon pose, or coming into all fours. And so in this instance, bringing my right knee towards my right wrist, my foot towards my left wrist. So whichever way is easiest for your students to come into this. But notice that the knee is going to be out a bit further than the hips. So it creates a little more space for the hips. And notice if your students start to roll onto one side, keeping both hip bones facing directly forward, squaring those hips, keeping good alignment that way. Slight squeeze to the belly to protect the low back, and then shoulders down and away from the ears. From here, if you're having your students come down into that resting pigeon, reach forward with the chest, reach forward with the whole body as you come down so that you're lengthening out through your spine and not just rounding down into it. Once your students are down here, encourage them to keep the foot that's forward, keep that foot flexed to help, again, protect the knee. If they do come all the way down to the ground, you can give them the option to bring their hands behind their back, turning the foot towards the bent knee. And that's going to help keep their hips balanced, keep their hips in a more neutral position and give them a little bit deeper stretch. And have your students stay there for quite a bit. Have them stay there for, maybe 5-6 breaths. Just take their time in that, give them a chance to really relax into that posture. Slowly come back up And then before they just bring their leg back, why don't they curl the back toes under and take some pressure off the hips first. So if they've been there a while, there might be a little bit of stiffness. Give them that chance to take the weight off the hips and then slowly bringing that foot back either into downward facing dog or back into all fours. All right, our next one is boat pose. In boat pose, the main thing to think about is keeping the chest open. When our students come into boat pose, there's a tendency to round forward, be kind of rounded in this position, close off the chest, giving them the cue of leaning back into your tailbone, lifting the feet, maybe just slightly off the ground, but really drawing the shoulders back, lifting up through the heart, and then lifting their legs maybe a little bit more. Arms can come forward, but you want to make sure that they're still drawing that chest open, drawing the shoulder blades back. If they find this hard, if you find that they're rounding, that they're leaning back too much, just have them bring their feet down a little bit more, even to the ground, so they can really open up through the front of the body, open up through the heart, and keep that nice spinal alignment. Okay, our next one is Cobblers Pose. So from boat pose, we had our pelvis in kind of a posterior, leaning back into that position. In Cobblers Pose, we're going to bring the pelvic bowl forward. So scooting back, so you're on the front part of your sitting bones and bringing the feet out in front of you. Inhaling, lifting up through the heart. Exhaling, elbows come in front of the shins and forehead comes towards the feet. Want to make sure that your students are scooting back so they come onto the front part of the sitting bones so that pelvic bowl tilts forward, and bringing the elbows in front of the shins so that there's a little more space for the shoulders, between the shoulders and the ears, and there's a little more stretch in the low back. After you have your students stay there for a while, have them slowly come up, and maybe if they've been there quite a while, bring one knee up and the other, give them a chance to shake their legs out. From here, keeping one foot forward and bringing one foot in, toes facing straight up towards the ceiling for Janushir's Asana. Again, there's a tendency to kind of lean back and maybe reach forward, rounding the back, putting too much pressure on the low back here. So give your students the cue of bending the knee and then scooting back so they're on the front part of the sitting bones, bringing the pelvic bowl into that anterior, that forward tilt. So that, and keeping the toes straight up towards the ceiling to create a balanced stretch in the back of the leg. And from here, walking the hands down or keeping the hands around the sole of the foot as they keep scooting back, pressing the sitting bones up and back. If they need to, they can keep this knee bent. We'd rather have a bent knee and a more neutral spine than too much rounding or too much tucking in of the low back. And then have your students stay here again for quite a while so that they can relax a bit into this, so that they can allow that time and the weight of their body to bring them into that posture a little bit more. And then slowly come back up. From here, coming into a seated twist, it could just be a one-leg seated twist with toes facing straight up, crossing your other foot over, lifting up to the crown of the head, and then bringing one hand behind you as you inhale, lift up straight, sitting up straight. And as you exhale, either just bringing this hand around to kind of hug the knee in towards the chest, or bringing the elbow on the outside of the knee, coming into this twist. Main thing with any kind of twisting, whether this leg is straight and toes facing up towards the ceiling, or you bring this foot in and you're pressing down through both sitting bones, you want to make sure that they maintain that straight spine, that they're lifting up through the crown of the head, and then begin to twist so that that twist is on a more neutral axis, that they're not turning as they're leaning over, but they're sitting up straight and then turning, looking over the shoulder. Inhaling, lifting up through the heart, lifting up through the crown of the head, and exhale and twist. So those are just a few alignment cues to keep in mind when you're practicing seated postures. Thank you.